This recipe is for buttered chicken. You might wonder, why am I making this? There are already several recipes on YouTube already for this. Don't be fooled by people from India or someone wearing a turban. They're not professional cooks. They've not worked in a real restaurant serving quality Indian food, I can tell you. They make many mistakes, and looking at them, I often laugh at how they have the audacity to get on YouTube and try to tell people how to cook when they obviously don't know themselves. This recipe solves all the problems that you obviously have encountered if you've tried following on any of the other recipes and wondered, why doesn't it taste like the restaurant? What went wrong? This recipe is the answer to your question. As you can see, this is quite a collection of spices, and they are not going to be toasted. They're just going to go directly into the grinder and all combined at once. And this is it. We got the yogurt, we got the spice added to it. It's a lot of spice. And about a tablespoon of lemon juice. And that's 15 milliliters. We're going to whisk this all together. Now you can add red food coloring to this. A lot of people these days are afraid of red food coloring because of the problem that there was with red dye 40 being discovered to be carcinogenic. But the red food dye that I'm using is completely natural and is not going to hurt you. But it's up to you. If you're afraid of it, don't use it. It is traditional to put some red food coloring in this. And that's it. We're ready for the chicken to go in. You can use potatoes or onions or other things. I like to use this metal food basket, and I cover it with foil like this just to make the cleanup a little bit easier. You're going to thread the chicken onto skewers, and you're going to poke them in here so that it'll stand up, and then this can go in the oven and become the kebabs. But you really want to soak these skewers in water first for at least an hour, and then that way the skewers won't burn. Okay, set up here on a tray with lips around it so that nothing will run off onto the floor. I've got an old pastry brush. I've got the wooden skewers that were soaked in water. If you can't find ones that are this height, of course you can get shorter ones and cut them in half. These are unusual to find. I've got a small bowl of oil, and of course I've got the chicken, which I'm going to move over here one piece at a time. This is the operation. One of the other mistakes people make is they don't brush off enough of the marinade. It's like they spent money for the spices and they think that the marinade should mostly cook with the chicken. It should mostly not cook with the chicken, because this is going to give you this crunchy little nasty bits of serious spice that you don't want. So after you kind of brush it off a little bit, now you're going to brush it with oil to help further wash it off. Then you're going to thread it onto the skewers and put it into that makeshift pan that I showed you earlier. So there's the first one ready to go. And this is what you want to end up with. Then you remove the chicken skewers to a plate to cool. I put a little bit of lemon juice over the top of them. At this point, you can add it to the sauce later, but it actually is better to put it on the chicken now. It'll help flavor the chicken, which is where you want the lemony flavor, less in the sauce, more on the chicken. So just put it here and let the chicken cool down quite a lot before you cut it up and put it into the butter chicken sauce. The first step is to assemble the ingredients. We have a couple of tablespoons of unsweetened coconut, a bay leaf, half a dozen allspice berries, a full tablespoon of green cardamom pods, and 1.5 teaspoons of ground nutmeg. And you're probably thinking, this is lot of ground nutmeg. I've never used that much ground nutmeg for anything. That's really what the flavor of this dish is. If you're not aware of it, but it's really the interplay between the massive amount of green cardamom and the nutmeg, with the background, of course, of the spices and the tomatoes and the cream. But this is your flavoring components. Okay, into a hot pan, I'm going to put 60 milliliters of clarified butter. I mean, usually I don't bother clarifying butter, because usually it's a waste of time. You can just use a little oil with the butter to keep it from burning. In this case, you actually need the clarified butter. This recipe is haunted by many different stages in which it will get very bitter, and that's also why a lot of Western cooks add a lot of sugar to this recipe to try to compensate for the bitterness that they accidentally introduced. They don't even realize where it came from. But that's one of the stages. Also, this pan is not very hot. On a scale of 1 to 10, I've got it on a 4 right now. So it's going to cook for maybe 2 minutes before we add the garlic. Just enough to get that nutmeg toasted, and coconuts just started to cook. Okay, it's been a couple of minutes. Now I'm going to add garlic. You notice how large I've got these pieces cut? This is another mistake that introduces bitterness into this recipe by most people. This is going to cook for a long time. When you put little small pieces of garlic in, a lot of it's going to burn, gradually burn, and that's bitter. You don't need to cut them up small because it's going to cook for a very long time. This keeps it from burning. So we're just going to saute this for another few minutes until the garlic starts to soften a bit. Now we're going to turn our attention to the tomatoes. And one of the mistakes, again, that introduces bitterness is that these tomatoes have a little part of green on them. Getting rid of that is not enough. This is still bitter. You need to take a knife and go in and cut this whole top part of the stem. Make a conical incision and get rid of that. That's going to be bitter in the end. Now the rest of the tomato could be cut up coarsely and used, and that's what we're going to do. Now as you can see, the little bits of garlic are starting to brown, but the heat is very low. In fact, I turned it down to 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. But we've got some little slightly toned canned garlic. That's what we want. Now we're going to add all of the tomatoes. And this is going to cook for quite a while. You're going to stir it once in a while. I'm going to increase the heat to 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. Still not a lot. And it's going to cook for a long time. And while we're waiting for this to cook, we can turn our attention to the green chilies. We're going to use 2 of these, and these need to be split and scraped out. You don't want the membranes, you don't want the seeds. I don't care if you want it hot. This is still an important step. You can add heat later with some chili powder, but this part needs to be scraped out because this is the wrong kind of heat. It contains flavor components that don't go well in this dish. And after you've got them seeded in just the usual, coarse chop. And the same thing for the ginger. You don't have to be exact with this at all because it's going to get ground up anyway. And you're going to put it together in a little prep bowl here with the onions and the chilies. I want to show you what's going on with the tomatoes. They're still cooking away. It's been half an hour now. Half an hour. And we're going to cook them more. This is not done yet. Now, in a separate pan, we're going to heat up another ounce of clarified butter, along with the chili peppers, the onions, and the garlic. I'm sorry, not garlic. Along with the chili peppers, the ginger, and the onion. And a teaspoon of cumin seeds, whole. Now it's been over 45 minutes, and despite occasional stirring, you'll see it's just starting to want to stick to the bottom of the pan. That's a good thing. That means you've done everything right. It isn't burning. Kept this over medium heat, not a high heat. Can't rush this. It's going to take about an hour in all to cook before you get it to the right stage. on a medium heat. Don't try to rush it. Meanwhile, the onions and cumin seeds and chilies and ginger are still very, very gently cooking in clarified butter over low heat. Low heat. You don't want anything burning. See, these onions are not burned at all. They're still very much white. And this is key. You need to sweat them. If you start cooking them on a higher heat because you get impatient, they'll start turning brown. Bitterness is your enemy in this recipe. We do not want any bitterness. You must be patient. That's why I started this at the same time as I was still cooking the tomatoes, because I'm doing this over very low heat. On a 1 to 10, it's cooking over 3. Okay, it's now been just over an hour of this cooking on a medium to medium low heat. It's actually on number 4 out of 1 to 10. And you can see the oil is separating. That's the stage we're looking for. Now we're going to add a full teaspoon of paprika to this. Yet another mistake that amateurs and non-professionals make is that they try just blending in the paprika later. That's not going to work. It's got to be cooked at this stage in the oil that's come off of this. This is also where you will add another, half teaspoon to teaspoon of cayenne pepper or Indian Kashmiri chili if you have it and you want to use it. That will obviously I'll make it much spicier. I don't like it that spicy. To me, butter chicken should not be a raging hot dish. But it's your dish. You want to make it hot? Make it hot. Add a teaspoon of cayenne right now. But this is the stage that you're going to do it at. So I've added the chilies, the onions, and the ginger to this. So it's got the clarified butter from that pan as well. And the paprika that's in there somewhere is going to continue to cook for 5 or 6 more minutes. Okay, now you might wonder, why is it important to have the paprika in here now? Why not just stir it in later? It doesn't make any difference, because paprika has to be cooked at a high temperature in oil in order to obtain the right flavors for this dish. Indians understand that different spices change flavor depending on whether you cook them in oil or water, or you roast them first, or you grind them first. All sorts of different changes. So this is an important step for this spice. It must be at a high temperature. As soon as I add liquid to this, watery liquid to this, temperature is going to go way down. That will affect the total flavor. Paprika in this recipe needs to be cooked at a high temperature, which can only be achieved with a lot of fat, which is the clarified butter, and not very much water. As you can see, this is pretty dried out after over an hour of cooking, about an hour and 10 minutes now. It's a pretty thick, goopy masala. So this is good. Now we're going to add chicken stock to this. Yeah, you can use water. If this was India, it would be water. I'm bringing in something from European cuisine here in order to make it a little bit better, and I'm adding chicken stock to this. So at this point, actually right after I add this, I'm just going to turn off the heat. I'm going to kill it. I'm going to let it cool down a little bit, and then I'm going to blend it in a blender. And I've rinsed out the pan that this was cooking in. I'm going to reuse the same pan with a big sieve over it. And all of this contents of the blender is going to go in there, and it's going to be rubbed through the sieve as best as possible, of course. You're going to have some fragments left behind. That's what you want. You want to get rid of those fragments so that it's a nice, silky, smooth sauce. It's going to take a few minutes of rubbing. And after a few minutes, you end up with just some solids in here. Don't forget to wipe off the bottom of the strainer into the sauce. And here we have our silky smooth tikka sauce. Now this can be used as it is, or if you prefer, you can refrigerate it and continue with the recipe the next day. The sauce is actually just fine refrigerated. It's going to get more flavor infused into it when you put the tandoori chicken into the sauce. The final stages of this are to add some cream, about 1.5 ounces of cream to this. And you need to adjust the seasoning. It will need some more salt. I tasted it. You need to taste it, see what it's like. I'm going to add about a teaspoon of salt. Now, unlike the way that you usually get this at this point, this is already pretty sweet. When you taste it, you'll be surprised. If you've made this before with other recipes and you had to add tons of sugar, you'll be surprised. This is already pretty sweet. If you like your sauce, your butter chicken candy sweet, then you can add more, but this is already a surprisingly sweet sauce because we got rid of all the bitter components. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.